All right, let's jump right into this explainer. We're looking at a wild new playprint by independent researcher Maurizio Rossari, and it basically asks us to completely rethink the very fabric of reality. I mean, we're so used to thinking of the universe as this giant container filled with physical stuff, right? Well, this paper, the Relational Ontology Framework, throws that entire concept right out the window. It proposes something genuinely mind-bending. What if matter isn't fundamental at all? What if reality is built purely on relationships?
So here's our roadmap for the explainer. 1. Rethinking space and matter. 2. The primordial relational field. 3. Ontological friction and matter. 4. Explaining the dark universe. And finally, 5. Consciousness and systemic truth.
Section 1. Rethinking space and matter. Time to unlearn some of that high school physics.
Take a look at the standard view versus the ROF view. We usually think of space-time as this big, empty box, and matter is just the solid stuff placed inside of it. That's how we experience the world. But the Relational Ontology Framework, or ROF, says we need to throw away both the stuff and the box. Instead, reality is just a topological manifestation of a primordial relational field. In plain English, there are no objects, and there's no empty space. It's all just one giant, interconnected web of relationships, and what we perceive as reality is just the shape of that web. Moving on to Section 2, the primordial relational field. If reality is just a web of relationships, what are the rules governing that web?
The paper argues reality is built on octonions, which act as the substrate for this primordial relational field. Now, if you're thinking, what on earth is an octonion? I totally get it. It's a bizarre 8-dimensional number system in mathematics, where the order you multiply things actually changes your end result. The author is proposing that the mathematical rules of these octonions power a universe made entirely of pure, interacting relationships rather than physical things.
Which brings up a very practical question. So, what exactly is ontological friction? And how do invisible math relationships generate the universe we actually see?
Here is the definition. Ontological friction, represented as F, is the fundamental resistance, or rub, occurring within the primordial relational field that gives rise to all observable phenomena. Think about rubbing your hands together. That physical friction creates heat, right? Well, in this framework, the mathematical relationships in the field aren't perfectly smooth. They rub against each other. And that fundamental resistance, that ontological friction, is literally what creates the universe as we know it.
All right, Section 3, Ontological Friction and Matter. This is the fascinating threshold where abstract math becomes the stuff you and I are made of.
It's one thing to say everything is a relationship, sure, but how does a relationship become solid matter? How do we go from a mathematical rub in a field to a solid table, a planet, or the cells in your body?
0.85. That is the magic number. The paper introduces the relational coherence theory, which states there is a coherence coefficient tracking these interactions. For regular, solid matter to actually appear, that coefficient has to hit a critical threshold of approximately 0.85. Anything below that and the relationships just don't lock together into physical reality. So when coherence hits that critical mark, baryonic matter, that's the normal matter that makes up stars and planets and us, emerges purely as a topological defect. Think of it like a knot in the field. Imagine pulling a piece of string really tight until it loops and knots up on itself. In this framework, normal matter is literally just a knot in the relational field. You aren't made of solid particles. You are made of incredibly complex, coherent knots of relational friction. How wild is that?
And this perfectly explains why the hydrogen atom acts as the minimal stationary friction node. It's the simplest atom, so it's the smallest possible stable knot of friction you can have. Rossari also gives us the theorem of absolute non-staticity, which proves nothing is ever truly still. Because reality is fundamentally based on interacting relationships experiencing friction, the universe is constantly, mathematically buzzing at its absolute core.
Section 4. Explaining the dark universe. Let's see how this framework tackles modern physics' absolute biggest headaches. So we know baryonic, or normal matter, is a topological defect or not. But what about the invisible stuff that makes up most of the universe? Instead of hunting for undiscovered particles, ROF explains dark matter as regimes of relational viscosity. Essentially, it's just a thickness or resistance in the relational field itself that exerts a gravitational pull. And dark energy?
That is subrelational pressure, an underlying tension in the field that pushes things apart. It is a super elegant way to reframe these great cosmic mysteries not as missing objects, but as natural properties of the relational web.
Finally, Section 5, Consciousness and Systemic Truth. This is the philosophical climax of the preprint.
How does a web of math create our minds? Step 1. Analyze the associator tensor, the mathematical engine governing these relationships. Step 2. Establish the algebraic hierarchy of realities. Step 3. Redefine consciousness via the self-reference operator. In plain terms, consciousness isn't some mystical spirit, it's mathematically defined. It emerges when the relational field becomes complex enough to loop back and observe itself. And here is a massive takeaway. The framework establishes a strict thermodynamic basis, separating systemic truth from falsehood. This means truth isn't just a human concept or some philosophical debate. A systemic truth physically aligns with the coherent, energetic functioning of the field itself, while a falsehood generates a discordant thermodynamic signature. Truth is quite literally baked into the underlying algebra and energy of existence.
Which leaves us with a really profound thought. If you are simply a complex knot of relational friction, what does that change about how you interact with the world today? While this is a highly theoretical preprint, it absolutely strips away the illusion of isolation. If there are no individual objects and no empty space, if everything is just a topological manifestation of a primordial relational field, then connection isn't just a nice idea, it is the fundamental mathematical reality of the universe. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the universe around you.